Hello, everyone, and welcome to the WARC Podcast. I'm U.S. Commissioning Editor Cathy Taylor, and today we're doing another podcast in a short series that deals with VUCA, otherwise known as volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. What we're going to focus on today is the consumer trend towards Nouveau Nihilism, and a report recently released by Ipsos and WARC's sister company, Effie Worldwide, that looks at what is mostly a YOLO, or you only live once ethos on the part of consumers. The research in the report predates the events of the last few months, but with the constant shifts going on economically, from stock market swings to the back and forth over tariffs to fears of recession, this report and its insights seem particularly important now. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our guests who will unpack it for us. Shaun Dix, Global Service Line Leader at Ipsos, and Traci Alford, Global CEO of Effie Worldwide. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks a lot.
I think the first thing really to do is to set the foundation. So I'd like you to summarize the Nouveau Nihilism research and what stood out to both of you as being particularly illuminating. So, Shaun, I'll let you go first, and we'll flip back and forth.
It's a very interesting piece of research because it just shows how this YOLO, you mentioned the YOLO economy, is something that's really present today. And this idea of living in the now, or living for today, has become such a big topic, amid all of these macroeconomic forces that are pushing onto people. And I think we find ourselves in a world that is, geopolitically unstable. We have, economic trends that have been happening since COVID, and perhaps even before that, that are pushing us macroeconomic forces into this huge bucket of uncertainty, if I can call it that. And so what was interesting for me to see in the data is that the trend is not, so we have an average of around 62% global average, and in the US, 64%. If you start to look at the countries, that's interesting to see how varied they are actually. So you can see that Denmark has the highest level of Nouveau Nihilism. It's like 86%, and a country like Poland is not so worried about it at 39%. So there are some differences in the countries, but so that was quite interesting to see. And the second thing is that sometimes, and Traci and I were talking about this just last week, is that we think, is this just a generational issue? Is it the millennials, worrying about splurging on their Avo toast, or the Gen Zs worrying about what they're going to see in their reels or streams and TikTok? And what we see is actually it's probably not the case, that it's widespread across different target groups. And so that's probably the biggest thing. And then the other part, the other side of which we'll probably go into today, definitely, is it's an opportunity for brands as well. Right. And I think that's the point. That's, you've got to look at it and say, okay, the world is pretty dismal, and it can be quite negative in a way. But again, it's an opportunity for advertisers to pounce on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Traci, what are your big thoughts about what was discovered in this research?
Well, I think, when you step back and you look at from marketing in an effectiveness lens from today, I think, for me, it's about being honest, being human, but also being helpful, which I'll know we'll dig into a little bit more. And I think it's really important to stand back. And when we think about marketing effectiveness, I know everyone wants to have their KPIs, which absolutely upfront is incredibly important to understand your business context and your KPIs, but it is also about the culture that you create. And when you dig into this report, what stood out for me was some of the human truths around cynicism and optimism. But what people are really seeking is meaning, connection, but kind of in their own terms. So I think, tell it to me the way I want to have it, but give them a feeling of confidence and the fact that they feel understood. And, there are a number of different areas around judgment and humor and confidence and moments of joy where I think, and we have great examples of where that's really brought to life.
Yeah. Well, it is, among other things, I think this time is one where it's very easy to feel alone. And, we really see that need for connection kind of coming out over the last few months, I think. I am feeling it in the US quite pointedly, and it really spreads across demographics, age groups, um, which is really pretty compelling to see, honestly.
It is, and I think, you know, when you look at this report, I think it's a fabulous reminder to marketeers that don't chase the trend. Stay clear on your purpose, your value, and your relationship with your audience. Because if you do all of that, focusing on some of the amazing insights that Ipsos has been able to pull, it's very powerful. And there's some big, growth opportunities. I know we're all feeling a little battered around the world at the minute, but, there is opportunity and growth in what we do.
No, I just want to add to what Tracy said because this point on meaning and giving people meaning are almost translated into empathy, having empathy for people. And I can think of some brands, and I live in Hamburg in Germany as an example. I work in a global role. So we have in the telecommunications sector some brands that are often pushing product related messages that are very much focused on price and competition on all of the things that you know from telecommunications, right? But I think of one of the most successful brands here that's done a really good job of what Tracy just described is actually they took a position on saying, standing against something, not for something, which sounds a bit weird. It sounds like, oh, Shaun, did you just break that with a translation from German to English? But actually not, because they said, okay, we want to stand against something that is basically against social hate online. So that was the first part of this campaign. I'll reveal the brand in a minute. But I think if you look at the advertising sector and how everybody's shouting at consumers with all their different offers, that was a big, bold step. And then they continued to go in the direction of building their brands, creating a connection with people on a branded level, on a high level. And they brought out an ad that was awarded last year in Cannes and in various different things, which was about Ella without consent. So it's about basically protecting children's content online, pictures and stuff like that. The point is just having a different angle and thinking about something you can do some good, but standing for something. And it shows that brands can actually have a role in society as well, even when maybe our political, because that's part of the issue, is that people feel quite everywhere, not just in the US, by the way, everywhere, including in Germany. They're quite fed up with the situation we find ourselves in, and there's a big swing globally across, and people just feeling, politics. We're fed up with that, and we're not really happy with the situation that we're in at the moment. So again, to Tracy's point, it's a beautiful opportunity to stand up and be counted and do something, and it can help your equity. It can help you over the longer term.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was the brand?
Aha, yeah, I deliberately waited for that. So it's Deutsche Telekom. It's as you know, if you look at the history of Deutsche Telekom, you could say almost like a parastatal from Germany that was then, privatized. But I think they've, in the last 3 or 4 years, have done a wonderful job of just building leaps and bounds ahead of the other telco brands in the market. By the way, they won the Grand Effie in 2023 for their campaign. So it's just, I think they're doing something very different. And again, it comes down to giving something back to people versus just talking about the things that everybody else is doing.
Exactly. I've got another fabulous example, Shaun, building on that. We have the DoorDash campaign about a self-love bouquet, which also won an Effie Gold in the US in 2024. And this is about a product making consumers feel like they are being seen. And I think that's really interesting, again, but with no judgment. So rather than this is all about Valentine's Day, and rather about putting couples on a pedestal for Valentine's, like most brands do, DoorDash embraced singles. And they had this fabulous narrative around women in particular, which is 42% of their audience, and the permission for them to enjoy Valentine's with the product Rose and giving roses, and fantastic results. A big emotional shift, which is what you've been talking about, understanding emotions, doubling down. They doubled their flower sales when they're traditionally, as most people would know around the world, famous for restaurant deliveries. So I think there are opportunities to see things differently, but making sure that we understand the human connection and how that makes people feel, linking to, a fabulous growth story.
In the earlier podcast I did on this topic, it was with Cone Powles, who's a professor of marketing at Northeastern. And we were talking about this idea of mutualism, right? And everybody kind of looking out for each other. And I think your report uses maybe different language, but it is that feeling of we're all in this together and how can we be of help to you? And that seems really potentially powerful to me. We certainly have seen it recently with COVID, but it's a good time to really lean into those attributes of your brand, if you have them, or build them in ways that make sense. The thing that's great about the Deutsche Telekom example and DoorDash too, but is that it's a little different to be putting your platform out against, hate content online when you're a telecommunications company. If you sell bikes, that doesn't really really work in quite the same manner.
That's great. And I love the DoorDash example as well. Just brilliantly done, really.
Yeah. So speaking of COVID, everybody's favorite topic, one thing that occurred to me looking at this research and just, I don't know, trying to get through the present moment is that there are some parallels, right? I'm like, oh, we're back to the small splurges that get you through the day. Like I'm having a bit of a flashback to reports we read about COVID. So the question is, how is this similar, but also how is it different than what we experienced just a few years ago?
What I think is interesting now is the adaptation to uncertainty. So it's almost like uncertainty is the new constant. And so what happens, I think, in that space is that things like value and trust and emotional reassurances from brands are really, they're incredibly crucial. And I think from an effectiveness lens, it's not just about being clever, and it's certainly not about being short term, which I felt was very prominent in COVID. But it's breaking through that emotion, but intelligently and strategically. So I think that those two combinations. And in the report, the Ipsos report, they reference, moments of joy, which I think is fabulous. And again, going back to, I think, a stellar example, which is the Heinz Irrational Love campaign, which won a silver in 2024, an Effie, where they tapped into their fandom, like people who love it, and the power to impact business and fundamentally shift everything, I think it was ingenious. So like it's, again, strategically disciplined, going back into your core, collaboration with your audience and your teams, I think is, we've moved on a little bit. I felt COVID was a little bit in the moment, whereas I think if I think of moments of joy, I think in this instance, it's about making sure it's intelligent and strategically disciplined is what really I think is really key.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because as many work listeners and subscribers know, we released this big paper this year. The multiplier effect that really talks about the need to think about the long term all the time and the long term of your brand, and to voice that all the time, even when short term metrics often prevail. And this report really, in some ways, gets at that you have to be focused on some really core principles over time as a brand when things are really uncertain. That's a real benefit, and it's not just about, well, we'll do a big discount because people are concerned about tariffs, so we're going to do some short term whiz bang promotion. So that's kind of an important one. So anyway, it's interesting to see those parallels.
It is. They lean into things like, Heinz, it's just not a condiment, it's part of your identity. Like, it has to be Heinz. Like, I just think, leaning into that and just spotlighting authentic fans, you know, doing all sorts of things, like putting it on spaghetti, et cetera, et cetera. How could you have a hot dog without it? Like, all that sort of thing. I think, tapping into that, I think is really crucial. And again, they had fantastic sales results and repeat purchase as well. So, it can be done.
Yeah, and I think they follow basically, they're pretty consistent with the way that they do this, because focusing on this no judgment, a touch of humor, and blending in with the core principles of what the brand stands for. And I remember when Gen AI or ChatGPT came out and they made that ad, basically mocking Gen AI. If you had to ask Gen AI what would ketchup look like, and then it would be a whole lot of answers, basically giving you, well, shapes of Kraft Heinz bottles, and it has to be Heinz ketchup, basically. Again, similar kind of idea of just poking fun, using humor as a key attribute, and celebrating what they're really good at. I think is a great one, a great example.
Well, the no judgment finding, just for a sec, is really fun to talk about. It doesn't really relate to me to any like huge macro trend exactly, but it was this whole thing, and I hope I voice it correctly, about people feeling judged for what they buy, and they don't want their purchase decisions to be I don't know, judged, I guess. So did I articulate that at all correctly, or am I really off base?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know really. I think what we see is people are feeling, that as goes in with the trend, of feeling like they can do things for today, and they're not really feeling like they need to be judged for a certain purchase or brand decision. I think that's what we're seeing in the data. So yeah,
Yeah, so don't judge me for buying a box of wine. Is that what
basically,
this is
yes,
about?
yes.
Okay. Okay. I'll let my husband know. Thanks. So another question that I had was that this research was conducted late last year, right? Before we really felt the full thrust of what's going on right now with economic volatility. And I want to just point out as an aside, we all know with recording this podcast and then releasing it, a week and a half from now, that things could have changed with tariffs and all the rest of it. But I guess the baseline is that uncertainty has been injected into the system, and that's more the point than any individual headline on any given day. But if you were to do this research again today, what do you think? How do you think it would, express itself? How would these trends express themselves? Would they be accentuated, or are we already kind of like baked in? Wow, uncertainty is life, you know?
Yeah, it really is a tough question. I mean, we all have probably our opinions and point of views. It is a tough question to answer, but I'll give it a bash. I think economic volatility hasn't gone away. So we know that since 2020 COVID, if we look at the top issues and what worries the world in the last 3 years now, inflation or cost of living has been one of the top things. Unemployment is one of the top things. Inequality is still there. Crime and violence still there. But this sense of, if you bucket the topics that all led up to economic volatility, they're still really there. So probably we would expect, and it's plausible to have the hypothesis that, yes, Cathy, this probably would be a lot worse right now, because people are thinking, oh my goodness, what is going to happen now to the price of goods and the cost of things. We will definitely have new data later in the year. We don't have it right now. I asked a question already. I was like trying to find out. But I mean, it's obvious that people are worried. So they're already worried, and this just makes it even worse. And I think that's where we really find ourselves at the moment. So I think the problem with this whole situation is that every week or day, we were talking about it, Tracy, things change. It's very hard to forecast or predict where things are going. But yes, it is an absolutely difficult situation to be in right now, very difficult to forecast or predict what's going to happen. But it was already unsettling, and now it's multiplied by whatever factor you want to put there. I think people are like wondering what is going on right now, and yes, so that is a big concern, a big concern.
I agree, but again, the internal optimist, maybe I don't know where the Australians sit on your curve, Shaun, in terms of positive versus negative, but it also is an opportunity for brands to, play the trust card. I think, Shaun, in your research, we talked about this, like, the concept of trust versus traditional institutions, including political institutions versus brands. So I do feel, if you can be relevant but realistic, and have that fundamental respect for what consumers are living through at the minute, therein lies, it's a true opportunity. And again, in this report, what I thought was interesting is this opportunity of giving confidence and the link to financial education. So, like, we all know we're in, inflation, et cetera, all those things that you highlighted. But I do think there is an opportunity in that space as well. And again, I'll give you a great example, which is Prudential. Again, they are in the financial space, so they probably have a slight sort of advantage in relation to that. But, they talk very clearly about, again, going back to probably a little bit of what's running through the whole report, like, think about your financials, not just when things are bad, but when things are good, and linking through and linking tools and, ideas that they should be thinking about. And that, just taking control, taking that tiny little bit of control back, encouraging proactive planning around life. And I think, there is a role that brands can play. But again, going back to my original, don't make it trendy, make it strategic, intelligent, linked to your underlying purpose. And then, you have an opportunity to grow.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because there was a trend unearthed in this report without being trendy. No trendy. That was about the future. And so I was going to ask you, about that trend because I don't want people to sit and think that everybody's just living for today and throwing caution to the wind, et cetera. That would be kind of a misread, I think, of what you're talking about.
You're absolutely right, Cathy, and I think the Prudential example is a good one because when we did this separate study to look at the drivers and the factors that could possibly help people with all of these trends going on, and we look at the data, we could see data shows that people are looking for brands to do more, and particularly in the younger groups, so Gen Z, for example, 18 to 27. More than half of them want brands to address these challenges that Traci mentioned, right? So that's a wonderful opportunity to say, okay, how do I, as a young person, start to think about like how I'm going to own my own home or prepare for my, starting a family or whatever it might be. So there's always on the side of, let's say, all of these different factors that are coming in, there's always an opportunity for brands and advertisers to leap onto that and to say, okay, let's understand our base better. Let's understand what we can do to provide new sets of services, communicate to them in a way that relates to the current needs that are out there. And I think that's the flip side of it always. There's never just one side. So there's always the other side that you can look at. I love the Prudential one. It's a very clever way of just communicating how they can help out in these times of stress and all these macroeconomic forces pushing down. So yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a really pointed issue too, because a lot of what the angst is about with younger demographics is, how will they own a home? Is that even an aspiration they can have? And you can you can see it from both angles. One is I want to plan for it, And the other is, well, I don't know that that's ever going to happen to me, so I'm going to enjoy, the current day. I'm going to get the most out of every day and not think too hard about the future. So again, it's kind of a flip side. That's my own interpretation, but you may have other thoughts on that one as well. So I wanted to close this with what the biggest takeaways are for how brands should, respond to the current moment, and what can really differentiate a brand during times of stress. And we've certainly talked about that a bit, but it's always good to kind of encapsulate it in a nice group of takeaways that our listeners can walk away with and say, okay, this is something I can really take action on in my business.
Sure. So I think if I think about effective organizations today, I think it's about being deliberate. You make choices, you build, and effectiveness just doesn't happen by accident. So I think, and what I see in this report, which we see all the time, I'm sure Cathy, you see it, and Shaun, you see it, not just in this across the board, is that effectiveness is about being human. So I think if I was going to pull out some traits, so to speak, is your effectiveness needs to be built into your culture, which I said up front. And it's not just simply about the goals, it's about an ongoing discipline. It's across all functions. I think that's really clear. And I think ongoing, continuing, and I think in times like this is always a challenge for everyone in any business, from the CEO to CMO, is that striking that balance between the long-term equity and short-term brand performance. And I think the more a CMO can share its responsibility, it will give them a competitive advantage. And I think that for me is the key things. Is effectiveness is an everyday occurrence, and it's very, very human.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are great insights. So thank you, Shaun.
Yeah, to build on what Traci said, I think it's on top of that is having a clear line of sight throughout the process of whenever you're developing your marketing strategies or your communication, is making sure that you understand who you're talking to. Because if we want to be human, we want to understand our target audiences and our people. We need to know how they're ticking today. So, need to understand them, need to know who they are and what's going on. So, take them along the journey, do the research that you need to do so you can understand how you can unlock those moments of empathy, those rich human insights that we know are so important and powerful for brands to leverage, particularly in these moments. I think Traci mentioned three things that I thought, so three things that are highlighted actually in the paper. So the one is create and embrace moments of joy, which you spoke about through your example, and which is great, right? So there was a lovely example of that. And there are opportunities to do that, to balance joy with future planning, or there are opportunities for brands in the future in uncertain times. There's the touch of humor, no judgment. We chatted about a bit as well. So with that great example, so that's a great one we can use. I remember last year in Cannes, everybody was talking about have we lost our sense of humor? And I think people really need that in these times. So so we can do that quite nicely. That's great. Use empathy in your storytelling. Acknowledge the financial challenges that people have. Use humor to bridge the gap between all of these different things. And then lastly, I think what you did with the Prudential example is this confidence is in. So, there's an opportunity for companies to educate as well on what to do in the future. As I mentioned with the Gen Z example, they can provide comfort, reassurance, maybe easier tools or products to use that are not so complex. And that's an opportunity for any marketing person to think about, okay, how do we respect the fact that we have these situations and challenges in the market, and how do we use those to our advantage to offer hope, to offer practical solutions, so that people can make the right choices and decisions. So, yeah.
Well, thank you both so much. Really, really great insights. And as I said at the top of the podcast, we are doing both podcasts. I recently recorded the one with Cone Powell's, which you can find. And in addition to that, we have a lot of content on WARC that will help brands deal with all of the things that we are going through right now. So please check it out. So I want to thank Traci and Shaun again for being with us. And if you don't subscribe to the WARC podcast already, you should. And it's available on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.